good evening, and welcome to Counterculture with Danielle D'Souza-Gill. The culture's gone crazy, media's gone mad, and reason has become repugnant. Here, we focus on facts and how to fight back. Tonight, we'll be talking about the crisis of virtue in our society, discussing the recent Nashville shooting, as well as where virtue has gone in Hollywood. Let's get started.
Trans women, if they lock you up for identifying as a woman, fight, resist. You're gonna die anyways. We're going to die anyways. Fight them. Hurt them. If they put their hands on you, beat them.
Yes, TPUSA, you dumb bitches. Whatever. Fuck off my campus.
Hey, that's illegal?
Yeah, sure. Whatever.
That's assault, actually.
Tolerance is not a virtue. Democrats will swear up and down that it is, but they are lying. More on that later. Every legal and moral code in the history of mankind is nothing more than an exercise in intolerance. No society in history can function unless it makes clear what actions are bad and what are permissible or good. It's so obvious that it's a wonder that there are people who go around extolling tolerance as a virtue with a straight face. That is not to say that intolerance is the virtue that tolerance cannot claim to be. Intolerance has its own downsides that are equally destructive to the fabric of society. Ask any conservative facing an intolerant DC judge. But by elevating tolerance to the level of virtue, the left has severed tolerance from any moral judgment that would guide such a decision-making process. They say that to do good, you must thoughtlessly tolerate, and in the process, people are convinced to allow things which are not only not good, but clearly are objectively evil. The word for this kind of twisting of one's moral compass is perversion. Perversion is when you take what is normal and good and turn it into a tool of evil. The people who think this way are thus perverted and have no business whatsoever participating in any broad discussion of public morals. This is simple. This is obvious. It is also anathema to the leftist worldview, which is how we know they are lying as they claim tolerance as a virtue. Tolerance and intolerance are both acts of the will. One chooses to either bear or not bear something, but in a normal situation guided by traditional morality, there is an inherent mutual exclusivity in this choice. You either tolerate your neighbor or you don't. You either tolerate murder or you don't. There's a whole slew of things the left are proudly intolerant of. Traditional families, Christianity, conservatives, children, biology, law and order. And there is a list of things which the left tolerates as virtues, which the right abhors. The murder or incarceration of conservatives, sexual exploitation of children, crime, vaccine mandates, body mutilation fetishes, kangaroo courts, authoritarianism, and the surveillance state, to name a few. And how is that playing out in society? Not well. American society has become a lucrative niche market for the medical transition industry, which is backing the normalization of the gender dysphoria mental illness through groomers in schools and libraries. Liberals love this. This led to various horrific discoveries as parents of children who committed suicide discovered the schools secretly transitioned their child without their knowledge. We have underage boys dressed as strippers twerking in nightclubs for the entertainment of adult sexual deviants, and no parent can trust that their local government, school, or hospital is not injecting their child with puberty blockers underage or scheduling them for surgical alterations behind their backs. In response to this intolerable insanity, many communities and states responded by enacting legislation to illegalize actions which were unthinkable violations only a few years ago. By the very nature of their intolerance, these measures were virtuous in the evils they prohibited. The response by the trans community has been nothing short of revelatory. They responded by claiming these laws were somehow genocidal against transgender people, when all they did was to place common sense controls to protect young and impressionable children. But there was no quelling this outrage. Trans advocates, people who themselves are not trans, but are liberal, began selling and wearing merchandise using silhouettes of long guns in the color of the trans flag with the words trans rights or else. Or else what? The implication isn't hard to see. That graphic is a threat. And along with this have been a number of videos and social media posts by transgender people calling for the use of violent force against their perceived enemy, people who value their children and want to preserve their innocence. So that's exactly what happened. On Monday, March 27th, a disturbed individual named Audrey Hale shot her way into a Christian school she once attended and killed 3 adults and 3 innocent small children. Audrey Hale was radicalized by the trans movement with the help of the media, which lockstep disingenuously refers to the body mutilation of children as, quote, gender-affirming care. This is a big phrase amongst liberals. But she wasn't the first. In 2018, 2019, and 2022, there were 3 incidents of mass shootings by transgender people. And as reporter Andy No has noticed, the trans community is heavily overrepresented among violent criminals arrested in riots. That's not the only place where the trans community is overrepresented. According to a Canadian study, the group is the easiest to turn into violent radicals, and that's probably something the left has figured out. In contrast with previous research, men and women have comparable levels of support for VR, violent radicalization. Transgender and gender-diverse youth emerge as the group at the highest risk of support for VR. This is in line with results of a recent survey conducted during the pandemic that highlighted high levels of support for VR as well as psychological distress among gender minorities. But there is surprisingly little research on the psychological effects of the hormone therapy that transgender people undergo. At best, we have studies showing that men who take estrogen are at higher risk of heart attack and stroke, and women who take testosterone are more likely to suffer from high blood pressure or blood clots in the lungs. When it comes to psychological effects, the studies unanimously proclaim hormone treatment is safe and associated with significant improved psychological functioning. Ah, the old safe and effective phrase. Where have we heard that one before? Of course, referencing, quote, improved psychological functioning in a segment of society with a 40% rate of suicide is not exactly reassuring. That high rate of suicide is why, back before transitioning was turned into an industry, the Mayo Clinic used to ban the medical procedure of gender transitions. It was seen as, quote, cooperating with the disease and increased the risk of patient suicide. But you don't need studies to see that there's something really wrong here. Transgender rhetoric is completely detached from reality. Protecting children from sexual predators is genocide? It's the transgender community that is trying to inflict the nonsensical madness of pronouns and putting men and women's sports, bathrooms, and locker rooms. Not only is it considered violence to be against this, but many transgender people claim as rights things which no normal functioning person would. For example, the Trans Resistance Network responded to Hale's demonic act by saying that she was motivated by the frustration that she had no other effective way of being seen. That is not normal. No one has a right to be seen by everyone. Society cannot function when everyone is being threatened under force of law or death by a lunatic to constantly genuflect in adoration of the person, of the mentally ill patient or the narcissistic psychopath, or else be killed. And if you think it will only take one more round of capitulation and appeasement before they'll leave you alone, you aren't paying attention. Because the term trans isn't just short for transgender, it's also short for transhuman.